Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Tennant. I am an associate consultant at IBIS Incorporated. I graduated from Clemson in May and joined IBIS's university program for recent college grads to teach them to become consultants. And I'll be delivering a webinar for you all today on attribute-based pricing in Dynamics AX 2012 R2. What we'll go over today is why we will be using this pricing, what kind of attributes you'll be defining, how to assign those to products, and then how to actually build your pricing models. The main part of this presentation will be building the models. It's not super complicated, but it's not very straightforward. You just need to know what you're doing, and once you realize the framework that's built there, it's really easy to build these models. But first, we need to know why we're using this pricing. These batch attribute-based pricing models are only used in procurement for purchasing potency items. It's a sort of control mechanism for purchased items. You want to make sure, especially with potency items, that you're getting what you're paying for. So to define a potency item is an item with a specific concentration of an active ingredient. An example of this would be a raw material where you want it to be at a certain acidic level, or you want to have a certain amount of a mineral in your raw material, or a food product that's supposed to have a particular fat percentage or certain age. You don't want it expired. And pharmaceuticals are a big potency item because they have an active ingredient that's actually what makes it the drug. So when you're purchasing these items, you want to make sure that you're getting exactly what you're looking for, because then in Dynamics AX, you'll also be selling these items, and you want to make sure that your customers are getting what you expect them to be getting. We only use this in procurement because for produced items, you have a bill of materials or a formula, and your own internal controls with those should make sure that you're getting exactly the potency that you're looking for on these potency items. So this is more of a check and balance for your vendors in order to ensure that your customers are getting what you're looking for. Creating attributes in Dynamics AX is very easy. You actually go to the Inventory and Warehouse Management module, and it's in the setup. There's a tab called Batch Attributes, and that's where you'll access both your product attributes and your attribute groups. Now these attributes are the different characteristics of your potency items, and they're entirely user defined. So you can create an attribute with a different name, description, ranges for the minimum and maximum of the attribute, and a target quantity or a target amount for that attribute. So an example would be acidity. Let's say you were going off the pH scale, your range would be 0 to 14, and if you wanted a certain acidic quantity, you would say, like, I want it to be an 8 pH level, and you could measure your items that way and compare it to your desired quantity. You can set your attributes to mandatory level or prompt level. Mandatory level will throw an error if you test the item and it doesn't meet the desired quantity or the desired amount. You'll get an error and you'll have to fix that error. Prompt will just be, it'll tell you if you have that issue, but you can keep moving. So it just depends on how tight the controls are for that item. Something like a pharmaceutical industry would have very tight controls, and you'd probably want that on mandatory. But for other things, if you're purchasing raw materials, for example, and you purchase a very large bulk material, prompt would make more sense, because you're not going to return a huge amount of whatever material you'll have. You'll just want to retribute that price. They're all user defined. There's none in Dynamics AX to start. I'll go over how to actually make these attributes. That's a very simple process. They're not in AX because the different industries have thousands of different attributes for their items, and each industry will have different codes and names and descriptions for those items, and so you can't really just shoehorn it into AX and have everybody using the same thing, because it's going to be different for every industry. You can also make batch attribute groups. And doing so will allow you to group multiple attributes and then assign those to items that share those attributes. So it's just you can build a group based off of item group or based off of customer group, just depending on what shared attributes those have. And then you have your base attribute with the desired quantity, but if you put it into a group, you can change the desired quantity just for that group. You can change it for each individual item, and then it'll still have the standard in there. Assigning the attributes is very easy as well. You'll do that from product information management and release products. On the manage inventory tab, you'll have batch attributes, and you'll only be able to add batch attributes if your product has tracking dimensions set to batch. Most items don't have this. You'll only see this really for your potency items, and attributes should only be applied to potency items. You can apply attributes to specific items for all customers, or you can go down another level even further and have an individual product and an individual customer for each item. And when you go that far, each customer might have their own specific specifications for what they're looking for. So you can change the minimum and maximum and target level for all of these attributes on a case-by-case basis. Building the pricing model. This is done from procurement and sourcing setup. You go into the price discount setup area, and it will be called attribute-based pricing details. Before you can create a model, you have to have your attributes. If you want your pricing model to be based on attributes. Now, you can have a lot of different elements in an attribute-based pricing model, not solely attributes. You can have purchase quantity, purchase price. You can have constants in there. It's a lot like algebra. So when your math teachers in high school told you that you'll be using this one day, they were referring to dynamics AX. So it's a good thing you listen to them, because you're going to be building models with variables like A, B, C, X, Y, whatever letter. It's based on letters, and then you'll build an equation using those variables and different operating symbols. So this is the specifics of how to create the pricing model. The elements of the equation are your variables. That's where you can set up either the attributes that you've created, or you can set up purchase price, purchase quantity, constants. They're all given letters based on whatever letter you want to assign it to, and then after you've created all the elements, you actually create the equation. So the equation will be variables and operating symbols. You can't put numbers in the equation, which is a little tricky at first, because it definitely makes it look a little cluttered at first. When I was first trying to set these up, I wanted to have like a percentage for one of my attributes, and so I typed it into the equation, and you have to validate the equation before it's active, and when I tried to validate it, it threw an error at me, and I had to fix that. So it was a little tricky, but once I got my handle on it, I was able to figure it out. And this will all become a lot clearer once we go into Dynamics AX for me to show you how to build them, and we're going to be doing that right now. All right, so this is Dynamics AX. This is our Contoso system. It's just got generic information. We'll start, I'm in inventory and warehouse management right now. I'm going to start by showing you guys where to build your attributes. These area pages are are common across all the modules. You have your common, inquiries, journals, reports, periodic, and setup tabs. And the work we'll be doing for setting up these equations is all going to be done through setup. So I'm in setup right now. I come down to batch attributes, and this is where I can set up a batch attribute group or my batch attributes. So we're going to set up an attributes right now. These are a few that I entered earlier. We'll just create a new one for the time being. So you give it a name, like we'll do fat content here. This is all user defined. Then a description, it can be as simple as just repeating the name, so that you can see that on the line as well. Or if you want to be more specific, you can say fat content of dairy products, which is just an example. The attribute type, there's a few different types you can do here. A string is actually entered words. So for example, I created this attribute called eye test earlier, and it says, are there visual imperfections was my description, and it'll be a string. And then you set your target, and the target is none. So you don't want any visual imperfections on this item, this test item, whatever it is. So the target is none, but when you're actually going in and testing that, you can enter for the batch attribute. You can say there's bubbling in the metal, or the wood grain is off, and then depending on whether you have the batch attribute set to prompt or to mandatory, it'll pop up with that error for you. Another option is integer, and that's just going to be a number. This is where I was talking about the tolerance level. The warning is just going to show you a warning and you can move on. The not allowed is going to give you a hard stop. So it's going to be the same thing for fraction. It's just more specific there. Integer will just be a whole number, and fraction will be a fraction or a percent. So like I created one earlier called percent level of salt in a solution. I set the minimum is 0%, the maximum is 100%, and the increment I set here, that's going to be how much it can increase and what level you can do it at. So you can go to the 1% level with this attribute that I created, and the target is 40% salinity, whatever that may be. So you can do it that way, or you can do a date. Those are the major ones. The target date will have a calendar pop up here. So yeah, I would just say today is my target date, or I'm going to say the 31st. So that would be if you have an expiry or something like that. So like I created the sell by date here. I want to make sure that the expiration date is far enough out, so then when I purchase this from a vendor, I have the ability, I have a window to sell it again to my customers. But fat content of dairy products would probably be an integer. We'll set a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 50, an increment of 1. For units, there's not like a unit of measure spot in these attributes, so the description is a good place to put that. So I'll just write in parentheses here grams. So that way I know exactly what I'm looking for. There won't be a unit of measure like on a bill of materials or a formula. You have a unit of measure specifically for that bill of materials. And in the attributes, you don't have that. So the description is just the place where I would put that. There's not like a best practice recommended way to do that, but that's what I would say. And then your target, again, you'll put this in here. It won't be a hard target for everything. You can change it on a case-by-case basis, but I'll just say the target is 25. That's right in the middle of our range there. Then I'll close this batch attributes. So that's where you create your attributes. You can have as many as you want, as many as you need there. Different industries are going to be using these batch attributes. Ooh, target cannot be achieved. Let's see, minimum, maximum. Oh, that was because my increment was set to 10, so it'll only allow you to have increments of 10 in there. And since my target was 25, it gave me an error because that wouldn't be doable. So now I'm able to close out of it. Thanks, AX. Thanks for helping me out. This is also where you create your batch attribute groups. You can have a big list of groups down here. I just created this sample one product attributes, and then when you click on group attributes, you have all the attributes that that you have going in there. So that's a pretty simple way to do it. It would just be like having, if you had 5 attributes that apply to all your dairy products, like fat content, expiry, so on and so forth. You put them all in a group, and then rather than putting those 5 group attributes on all the items that you have, you would just put the group in there, and it would save you a lot of time doing it that way. I'll go back into batch attributes real quick to show one more thing. I can go into this where used area, and it'll show you where this batch attribute is used. So it starts on batch attribute groups, and it's going to show you all the groups where that batch attribute is. And then you can also show by product and customer. So that's just like going down the line. The groups is the big thing, I think, because you want to make sure that this attribute is in all the groups that you want it to be in. And then product will be important as well once you start assigning them out to the different products that you'll use. Product and customer, that's a very specific level. I don't think most of your attributes will go down that far unless you have special orders for customers, because that you'd only send it to the product and customer level if you had a specific customer that wanted a different target level of whatever the attribute is than all of your other customers. So that might be common in some industries, I'm not sure, but I feel like that level is deeper than you'd ever go on most bases. So now we're going to go over to procurement, and we'll show how to build the models. We'll just use the breadcrumb bar to go to procurement and sourcing. It's in the setup area under your price and discount. It's attribute-based pricing details. Pretty straightforward. This is the first formula that I built for this example. As you can see, you have a name for the formula. I just named it test. It gives it a pricing ID that is generated by the system. That will be set when you have your number sequencing. This one, the number sequencing was just set to the company name dash 5 digits, and this one's the first one, so it automatically became 00001. And then you add all your variables in here. I'll add another variable real quick. This is where you set the letter that you want it to be associated with. I just went A, B, C, D. It might be easier to go X and Y and Z because when you're actually doing algebra, those are the most commonly used variables. So that might just be easier visually for you. But it really only matters when you come down here and you're actually building your equation. But we'll go into the equation in a second. Here's where you select your element type. You have quite a few different element types. You can base it off of purchase quantity, purchase price. Those would be on an order-to-order basis. What I'm doing is, for this test one, I built the formula is for purchase price. So what I'm setting up here, my goal was to set up a formula so that the price would lower if my material that I purchased had less toughness than I was targeting, than I told my vendor that it should have. And then the other thing you can set is a constant. That's important for actually getting your formulas to work. So I have one down here, and it's just 0.02, because what I'm saying is I want the purchase price to decrease by 2% for every level of toughness that it is away from the target. I'll remove that variable. This attribute field can only be chosen when your element type is attribute. There's batch attribute target and batch attribute actual. The target is whatever the set target is for either that item specifically or in general for the attribute if you didn't set a different one for that item, or if you brought it down again to the customer, to the item and customer level. It would be on a case-by-case basis there. And then the actual is what you actually saw the toughness as. That would be user-defined as well. So there probably is a toughness scale out there. I'm not familiar with it. I know that they use it in geology, and I didn't take any geology classes, so I don't know what it's called. But whatever that is, I'm sure it might not be a 1 to 10 scale, but in my case it is. So in this case, we'll just test the difference between the toughness. So once you set up all your elements or variables, I think it's easier to call them variables because truly that's what they are, you come down here and you build your equation. It looks confusing because there's no numbers, and that's because you have to set up those numbers as constants, as constant elements. So that's why mine has a number here just for the constant. Everything else doesn't have a number because it'll be different on a case-by-case basis, but this constant is going to be like that every time. So and this is just like building a formula. It's intuitive for some people who are good at math. It's not intuitive for people like me and other people who don't remember their algebra classes that well. But what I'm saying here, element A is my purchase price. And so I'll take my purchase price and I'll subtract And then I do the parentheses because I want these equations to be done on their own. I'll subtract the constant times the difference between C and B, which is the actual and the target toughness. So that will lower the price based on if the toughness is lower. If it's not lower, it's going to keep the price the same level. If it's higher, it's going to increase the price. So it actually goes both ways in this situation. It'll increase the price because you got more toughness than you wanted. You can set it up so that it'll only go one way, but in this case, for this just test, I did not do that. Before any equation is active, you have to validate it here. This one shouldn't have any errors. So we'll see. We'll let Dynamics AX think on it. Yeah, so it says the equation is okay. If it had any errors, it would tell you what it is. So when I was testing this, before I put a constant in there, instead of having the D for 0.02, I typed 0.02 in there, and it said number 0.02 is not allowed. The only thing you're allowed to have is your variables and then these operators, my minus sign, my parentheses, my multiplication sign, and then you can have plus and divided by. It's a pretty simple. You can't do square roots or anything like that unless you got really fancy with this. You could do a variable times itself, so like b times b, and that would be to square an item. But I don't know if you'd ever have an attribute-based pricing model that was that complicated. This is pretty simple functionality. It takes a few tries to get used to building this equation because it is just a little different from what you normally are working with, but once you figure it out, it's pretty intuitive, and you can set up as many pricing IDs as you want here. Again, industry to industry, it's going to vary on how often you're using this. Most industries don't have potency items, so this won't work for them, but when you do, this is a good way to accurately have your pricing. And not only is it good for your pricing, but for your valuations on your inventory, it's good because if you have an item and if a tougher item is more valuable, and you said I wanted 8 on the Scott Tennant toughness scale, but your item is actually only a 2, it's obviously going to be significantly less valuable, and you're valuing it at the level that you expected it to be rather than its actual level. So when it comes to tax season and when you're closing your books and making sure they're balanced, you don't want to be misrepresenting your inventory, especially you don't want to be misrepresenting it high because then you think you have a lot more capital than you do. And then when you're trying to sell these items to customers, you want to make sure you know what you have. You want to make sure I can guarantee that this is an 8 toughness. It's nothing lower, but you want to set these attribute-based models up so that you're testing for that. Let's get back to the PowerPoint. That's it for the presentation. We went over building attributes, assigning the attributes, and building your pricing model. If you guys have any additional questions, forward them to info@ibisinc.com, and we'll take a look at them. If you want to look at this presentation again, it will be up on our website before Friday, or Friday at the latest. So you can expect to see it there. You can leave comments there, and I'll be able to read those and get back to you that way. Or if you send an email here, I'll get back to you that way too. So I hope you all enjoy the presentation and have a nice evening.